The morning was colder than usual. Not in the sharp, biting way that winter sometimes stings, but in the way the air feels heavy with a sense of something unsettled, a kind of stillness that weighs down the chest. I had always found solace in the quiet of the park in the early hours. The sounds of the world outside hadn't yet found their way in. It was the perfect place to let the mind wander, or to simply breathe. But today, I didn't feel like breathing. I felt like suffocating in a sea of thoughts that kept pulling me under. My name's Michael, Mike to everyone else. I used to be a teacher. I used to be something before all of this. I thought that if I just kept moving, if I kept up with the routine, I might wake up from this dream, or whatever it was, of losing my son. But it wasn't that simple. Loss doesn't let you go so easily. I was in the park for no particular reason, just following the same path I had walked countless times before. There was an oak tree nearby, the one that we always used to sit under when Emily was younger. My son Kyle, he was gone now. It felt like the world had taken a sharp turn after that night. People tell you that time heals, but what they don't tell you is that the healing process is slow, painful, and like a wound that keeps reopening every time you let your guard down. As I made my way to the bench, something caught my eye. A dog. A small, scruffy thing. A terrier, I think, with matted fur that clung to its small body like it had forgotten what it was like to run freely. Its eyes. That's what got me. There was something about the eyes. They were too old for a dog this young, too tired. I could see that now, how life had etched lines into those eyes. Eyes that had seen too much. I glanced around, expecting to see an owner, but the park was as deserted as usual. Not a soul in sight. My heart tightened. I approached slowly, keeping my distance. There was no collar, no sign of any kind. Just the dog, curled up in the wet grass, a small bundle of misery in the cold morning light. I crouched down, not wanting to frighten it. The dog didn't move. It didn't even lift its head. I could hear the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze, but otherwise it was silent, so still, so abandoned. "Hey there, little guy," I murmured. "Where's your home?" The dog barely acknowledged me. And then, as if it was too tired to care anymore, it raised its head just enough to meet my eyes. I don't know how long we stared at each other, but in that moment, I saw everything that I had been hiding from for the past year. The isolation, the numbness, the fear of facing another empty day. I didn't know why, but I felt a connection, a need to protect this tiny soul that had nothing left to give. I didn't have much left in me, either, but I would try. It wasn't long before I decided that I couldn't leave the dog alone in the park, so I did what I thought was the right thing. I tried to coax it into following me. Maybe I could take it to the shelter or get it some food. Anything. I stood up, but the moment I moved, the dog stiffened. It backed away, its tail tucked between its legs. It was afraid. I could see that now. Not just a typical dog fear. This was something else, a deep, primal fear. Without thinking, I reached out to grab its collar, but the dog growled in panic, snapping at my hand. It startled me. I didn't expect the reaction. My mind flashed to the years I had spent around children. Sometimes they lash out when they're hurt or scared. I didn't understand why the dog would act like this. I don't know what happened next, but I lost my patience. It was like I was seeing that song's face in that small, trembling creature. The animal, the fear, it mirrored what I had felt for so long. And then, in a moment of frustration, I slapped the dog. Harder than I should have. The sound echoed in the empty park. My heart stopped as the dog yelped a high, fearful cry that echoed through the silence. For a split second, I stood frozen, my hands still hanging in the air. I had heard it, but just as quickly, I realized I wasn't alone. From behind a nearby tree, I heard a voice. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." I whipped around, the shock of being caught hitting me hard. A man stood there, a tall figure, his arms crossed over his chest. His face was unreadable. He had a stern look in his eyes, but there was something else, something more beneath that surface. His uniform, though casual, looked worn and experienced. He wasn't a cop, but there was something military about his stance, something trained. "Who the hell are you?" I asked, still reeling from what I had just done. "I'm someone who's seen too many dogs hurt by people who don't know what they're doing," the man said. "And I've seen too many men like you who think it's okay to take out your frustration on a defenseless creature." His voice was calm, but firm. It was only then that I noticed the badge on his jacket, a K9 unit insignia, faded but visible. His eyes softened just a little as he added, that dog is a lot like me. Retired, abandoned, forgotten. It's been through more than most people could handle. I felt the blood drain from my face. This man, this stranger, was no ordinary person. He wasn't just anyone. He had been part of the team that worked with K9s. That much was clear. I had slapped the very thing he had once trained and worked with. I didn't mean. I stammered, my voice faltering. I was just trying to help. The man didn't say anything else, just moved toward the dog. He kneeled down, and for a moment I thought he might comfort it. But instead, he just sat there, watching it with a quiet intensity, as if waiting for something to happen. I felt my own shame sinking deeper with every second. The dog, still shaken, hesitated. It looked up at the man, then slowly lowered its head, its body trembling. I didn't know what to say. How could I explain myself? How could I explain why I had done it? This wasn't just a dog in the park. It was a symbol of everything I had lost, everything I hadn't been able to let go of. Kyle, my son, was gone. And there I was, taking my grief out on a defenseless animal. I had become what I feared most, angry, bitter, alone. I didn't mean to hurt you, I whispered to the dog, tears welling up in my eyes. It didn't look at me, but it didn't look at the man either. It just existed. The K9 officer didn't rush in, though. He just kept watching, his presence soft but firm. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke again. It's about what you did. It's about what you do now. And with that, I understood. The man, who introduced himself as Mark, didn't leave immediately. He stayed in the park for a while, talking to me about his work with retired K9s, the trauma they carry, and the healing process. He didn't judge me for my actions. He didn't condemn me. He simply offered me a way to fix what I had broken. A chance at redemption. I realized that day that maybe I wasn't the only one in need of saving. The dog, which Mark called Rusty, had been abandoned. Its past was painful, and like me, it was struggling to find its way forward. But that didn't mean it was beyond help. Rusty was a survivor. And as Mark spoke, I began to feel something stirring in my heart. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't beyond saving either. The dog didn't need me to fix it, it needed me to listen, to care, to heal alongside it, and I would. We both would. I didn't sleep much that night. The image of Rusty's tired eyes haunted me, the same way Kyle's face had in the months following his death. That hollow stare, filled with both fear and a desperate hope for safety, was something I couldn't shake off. The park, once my sanctuary, now felt like a reminder of the darkness I had been living in for so long. The familiar bench where I had sat countless mornings now felt like a prison, one I had built for myself. The weight of my grief had been all-consuming, but seeing Rusty, that fragile creature who had also been abandoned, made me realize something I hadn't wanted to admit before: I had abandoned myself. Mark's words echoed in my head. It's not about what you did. It's about what you do now. What did I want to do now? Was I to keep hiding behind the walls I had carefully constructed? Or was I willing to face the pain, to let myself heal alongside this animal who, like me, had been broken? The following day, I couldn't stay away from the park. I had to see Rusty again, and somehow I knew that the same pull that had brought me here, the quiet connection I had felt with him, was what I needed. We had both been hurt, and maybe, just maybe, we could heal together. I found him in the same spot as before, lying in the grass. This time he didn't retreat when I approached. He lifted his head, his eyes still wary, but not as frightened. It was as if he recognized me, or maybe it was just the rhythm of human presence that calmed him. He was used to abandonment, but not this kind of steady, quiet presence. "Hey, buddy," I murmured, sitting down on the ground next to him. My legs ached, but I didn't care. This wasn't about comfort. It was about showing up. It was about proving to both of us that we deserved something better. Rusty didn't make a sound, but he didn't shy away either. His body relaxed, just slightly, as he laid his head back down on the grass. I reached out, my hand hovering in the air for a moment. I wasn't sure how he would respond, but I had to try. Slowly, I lowered my hand until it was just beside his nose. Rusty sniffed my fingers before letting out a soft sigh. It wasn't a growl, nor was it a bark. It was something quieter. It was a sigh of resignation, or perhaps relief. He allowed me to touch him, and I did, running my fingers through his fur. As I sat there, rubbing his back, a thought crept into my mind. What if this dog, this broken creature, was the one that needed to remind me that I wasn't too far gone? Maybe I had lost everything that I loved, but could I learn to love again? Could I open my heart to this animal, this symbol of the pain I had buried? As days turned into weeks, I found myself returning to the park every morning. Rusty had become my anchor. I didn't talk much to him, but we had our silent moments. He had a routine, and I, in some strange way, had begun to follow it. Each morning, I'd bring him food, sit with him, and let the time slip away. I wasn't sure if he had any kind of memory of his past life, but I could feel that he's starting to trust me in small ways. One morning, I noticed that Rusty seemed more energetic. He was standing near the park's entrance, looking down the path as if waiting for something. I followed his gaze, curious, but saw nothing. He turned to me, then back to the path again. It was as if he was expecting someone. "Who's waiting for you?" I asked quietly, my voice barely a whisper, as if I feared the answer. But the answer didn't come from Rusty. Instead, it came from behind me. "Has he been here long?" The voice was calm, but it had an authority to it that made me turn around. It was Mark again, the retired K-9 officer. I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "Yeah, he's been coming around for a while now." I didn't know if he belonged to someone or if he was just a stray. Mark studied Rusty for a long time before he spoke again. "He's a retired K-9. His real name's Maximus. His handler was one of my close friends. After his partner passed, Maximus was left to fend for himself. The shelter didn't know what to do with him. He's been living on the streets for months. I've been keeping an eye on him, trying to find a home." I stared at Mark, the words sinking in. Rusty, or Maximus, was no ordinary dog. This wasn't just some abandoned pup. He had been trained, part of a team, a protector, someone who had seen the darkest parts of human nature. And now here he was, just like me, broken and lost. His partner, he died. I asked, the words barely leaving my mouth. Mark nodded. "Yeah, his handler was a K-9 officer. He was killed in the line of duty. Maximus didn't take it well. He was close to him." I took a deep breath, a knot forming in my throat. This dog had been through so much more than I could ever imagine. His story mirrored my own in some ways. We had both been abandoned by the ones we loved. We had both been left behind by a world that seemed to have no place for us anymore. "It's funny," Mark continued, almost as if he could read my mind, "how we think we're alone in our pain. But we're not. This dog, he's survived by instinct. He doesn't need anyone to tell him how to heal. It's all about what he decides to do next." I stood there for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. Mark was right. Maximus didn't need anyone to tell him what to do. He had survived on his own, just as I had been surviving, waiting for something to give me a reason to live again. I had been so focused on my grief, my anger, that I had forgotten what it meant to heal. "You know, Mark," I said quietly, "I think I've been trying to heal all wrong." Mark gave me a knowing look. "It's never easy, Mike. But you can't force it. Healing is something that happens naturally, whether we're ready for it or not." As the weeks continued, I began to learn more about Maximus. Mark took me aside one day and told me the full story. How the dog had been through intense training, how he had been part of a team that saved countless lives, but also seen horrors that most people couldn't even begin to comprehend. Maximus had been a protector, a loyal companion to a man who had trusted him with his life. When his partner died, Maximus had been left with no one. He wandered the streets, searching for something he couldn't name. But now he had found me. The more I learned about Maximus's past, the more I realized how deeply connected our stories were. This wasn't just about a dog in need of a home. This was about a creature who had been tested by fire, who had given everything to protect others, only to be discarded when he was no longer of use. His abandonment had been brutal, but it was also a reflection of what I had done to myself. As Maximus's story unfolded, I started to open up about my own. I had been so closed off, so unwilling to face my pain. But with every day that passed, and every moment I shared with this dog, I started to understand something new. I had to forgive myself. I had to stop blaming myself for the things I couldn't control. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could choose how I moved forward. Maximus had shown me that. One rainy afternoon, I came to the park and found Maximus sitting by the edge of the water. It was a dreary day, the kind of weather that matched the mood that had been hanging over me for so long. But today I wasn't alone. Mark was there too, standing in the rain with his hands in his pockets. "What's he doing?" I asked, approaching slowly. Mark looked at Maximus, a soft smile tugging at his lips. He's waiting for the one thing he's always wanted: closure. I looked back at Maximus, who was staring at the water, his eyes distant. "Closure." "Yeah," Mark said quietly. "You see, Maximus's handler was a man named Greg. When Greg passed, Maximus couldn't understand why. He spent days searching for him, even after he was gone. But today he's here to let go." I watched as Maximus finally turned away from the water and walked toward me. There was a new light in his eyes, a sense of peace I hadn't seen before. I knelt down as he approached, and in that moment, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about saving the dog anymore. This was about saving myself. Rusty, or Maximus, had saved me long before I ever knew it. The rain had finally stopped, but the clouds still hung low in the sky, like a heavy veil that refused to lift. The park, once vibrant with the colors of morning, had taken on a somber tone. The dampness of the air clung to everything, to the earth, the trees, and to my very soul. Yet, in the midst of this overcast world, I felt something change inside me. I had been visiting Maximus every day, sitting with him as he grew more accustomed to my presence. We hadn't spoken much, not because we didn't want to, but because there were some things words could never convey. He had stopped flinching when I approached, and I had stopped looking at him with the same eyes that had once been filled with anger and frustration. We had both been broken, but now we were starting to rebuild each other. There was a connection between us that I couldn't explain. It wasn't just the bond between man and a dog. It was something deeper, something that resonated with both our pasts. I had lost my son, my family, and in doing so, I had lost a part of myself. I hadn't realized how much of that loss I had carried until I started spending time with Maximus. He had also lost someone. He had also been abandoned. We were both survivors of a world that had broken us in different ways, and somehow we had found a quiet understanding in each other. As the days passed, I started to notice the subtle shifts in Maximus's behavior. He no longer cowered when I reached for him. He would look up at me with those tired eyes, as if asking, "Are you sure?" It wasn't a question of doubt in me. It was a question of whether he could let himself trust again. I would always nod, softly saying, "I'm not going anywhere, buddy." One afternoon, as we sat together on the park bench, I watched as Maximus carefully sniffed the air, his ears twitching. He turned his head, eyes brightening as he saw something in the distance. At first, I couldn't see what he was looking at, but then I followed his gaze. A woman was walking toward us, her figure familiar. I had seen her before. She came to the park often, walking alone with a small, black dog by her side. Maximus stood up immediately, his body tense, but there was something different this time. Instead of retreating into himself, he walked toward the woman, taking slow, measured steps. My heart raced. Could this be the moment? Could this woman be the one who had once cared for him? The woman noticed Maximus approaching and froze for a moment, her eyes widening with recognition. She didn't say anything at first, but the expression on her face said it all. She had been waiting for this moment too. She had been waiting for the dog she had once loved. "Maximus," she whispered, her voice trembling. I watched the reunion unfold, not wanting to intrude, but unable to look away. Maximus, or Rusty as I had come to call him, slowly walked up to the woman, his tail beginning to wag. For a moment, it felt like the world had paused. The air around us seemed to hold its breath. And then, as if the past and present had collided, Maximus leaned into the woman, his body softening in her embrace. "I never thought I'd see you again," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I thought I had lost you forever." Tears welled up in my eyes. It wasn't just a reunion. It was a moment of redemption, a testament to the unspoken bond between humans and animals. Maximus had found her. The woman who had once been his person, and she had found him again. The woman, whose name I learned was Sarah, explained the story behind Maximus's disappearance. She had been Greg's wife. the same Greg who had been killed in the line of duty. Sarah had been devastated by the loss, and in the aftermath of Greg's death, she had been forced to move out of their shared home. She couldn't keep Maximus, and the thought of giving him away was unbearable. The shelter said they'd take him, she explained, her voice cracking. But I just couldn't leave him there. I thought maybe I could find a way to keep him. But then, I lost him. I don't even know what happened. He just disappeared. As she spoke, I could hear the pain in her words. She had never wanted to let Maximus go, but in her grief, she had lost sight of how to protect him. The decision had been out of her hands. But now, here he was, standing before her once again. Maximus didn't seem to remember the time he had spent with me. He didn't even look at me as I sat quietly on the bench. He was with Sarah, and that was all that mattered. It was a bittersweet moment. I had helped Maximus heal. I had given him the space and the safety to trust again, but I had to accept that his past had a place in the story too. Maximus wasn't just my dog, he wasn't just my companion. He belonged to someone else, someone who had loved him deeply, even if it had been from a distance. I stood up, my knees stiff from sitting for so long, and slowly walked over to them. I couldn't help but feel a sense of loss. But it wasn't a loss of Maximus. It was a loss of something I had been holding on to. The idea that this dog had somehow saved me. The truth was he had, but I had to let go of the notion that he was mine. Sarah, I said softly, not wanting to interrupt the moment between them. I think he's been waiting for you. Sarah turned to me, her eyes still teary but filled with gratitude. I don't know what to say. You've given me my dog back. I don't deserve this. You deserve more than you think, I said quietly. You loved him, and he needed to be with you. I could never take that from him. Sarah's face softened, and she nodded, wiping away a stray tear. Thank you. As I watched Sarah and Maximus walk away together, I felt a strange emptiness in my chest. It wasn't the crushing weight of grief that I had carried for so long, but it was something similar. A soft ache, a reminder that healing doesn't always mean getting what you want. Sometimes healing means knowing when to let go. I sat back down on the bench, staring out at the park that had become my refuge. It was quiet again, but this time the kind of silence that made my skin crawl. It was the kind of silence that felt, right, Maximus or Rusty had come into my life for a reason. He had shown me that I wasn't beyond saving, and that the act of saving wasn't always about keeping something for yourself. Sometimes about letting go and giving someone else the chance to heal. The days had passed, each one a little brighter than the last. The ache in my chest was no longer that all-consuming weight it had once been. Instead, it was a quiet reminder of everything I had gone through, everything I had lost and found again. It wasn't an absence anymore. It was a space where healing could take place. I hadn't seen Maximus, or Rusty as I still called him sometimes, in weeks. Sarah had taken him home, and I had heard she was doing well. He had adjusted to her presence once more, as if the months they spent apart had been just another chapter in the story of their bond. It was the kind of story that doesn't have a clear beginning or end, just a steady rhythm that moves through the heart of time. Sometimes I'm flowing, but always there. I kept myself busy. At the shelter, I met new faces, new animals in need of love, in need of a second chance. It wasn't about replacing Rusty. It was about continuing the work I had started, the work we had both begun. Maximus had taught me that healing isn't a destination, it's a process. It's not something you force. It's something you allow. It was a Saturday morning, the sun finally breaking through the clouds. I sat on the porch of my small house, a cup of coffee in hand, feeling the warmth of the day begin to seep into my skin. I had long since stopped trying to fill the empty spaces in my life with distractions. I had learned to sit with the silence, to allow it to be my companion. As I sipped the coffee, I heard the soft click of nails on the pavement. I looked up, my heart skipping a beat. There, walking toward me with a familiar gait, was Rusty, or Maximus as he was known now. He wasn't alone. Beside him, walking in step, was Sarah. For a moment, everything else fell away. The world slowed down, and it felt as though time had come full circle. Maximus stopped in front of me, his eyes bright with recognition. It was as though he remembered me. His tail wagged softly, and I could feel the years of distance between us melt away in that single glance. He had come back, and in doing so, he had taught me that there is no end to the lessons life offers. "Hey there, buddy," I said softly, crouching down to his level. "You doing okay?" Sarah smiled warmly from where she stood. "He's doing great," she said. "He's been a little bit of a handful, but he's adjusting. I think he still remembers you." I smiled, the corners of my mouth lifting in a way that felt new. I reached out and scratched the top of Maximus's head, feeling the soft, familiar fur under my fingertips. The years of pain, the sorrow, the loneliness, they had all led me here to this moment. And in this moment, I realized something I hadn't understood before. Maximus hadn't just helped me heal. He had been the vessel through which I learned to save myself. "I'm glad to see you both," I said, looking up at Sarah. "I never thought I'd see him again. It's good to know he's happy." "He's more than happy," Sarah said, her voice filled with affection. "He's whole again. And so am I." We stood there, the three of us, in a silence that felt rich with meaning. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that is full of understanding, of mutual respect. It was the silence of a bond that had been forged in pain, but which had transformed into something beautiful, something enduring. "I think you've both taught me more than I could ever teach you," I said quietly, feeling the weight of the words. Sarah gave me a knowing smile. "Maybe we all teach each other, in the end." Maximus nuzzled into my hand, as if to confirm her words. I chuckled softly, the sound of it foreign to me, but comforting nonetheless. "You know," I continued, "I think it's time I start my own journey. One where I don't hide from the past but embrace it. A journey where I don't just survive, I live." Sarah nodded, her eyes meeting mine in a way that made me feel understood. "That's the hardest part, living again." I nodded. "It is, but I'm ready to try." Maximus gave a small bark, as if he was in agreement, and I laughed again. It felt good to laugh. It felt like a small victory, a victory over the pain that had consumed me for so long. As Sarah and Maximus turned to leave, I stood and watched them walk away, the soft clicking of Maximus's paws growing quieter as they moved down the street. I stood there for a long time, taking in the peacefulness of the moment. There was no grand declaration of healing, no dramatic conclusion, just a quiet acknowledgement that sometimes the act of healing is a lifelong process, and sometimes that process is shared with others, people, animals, moments of stillness, and even the painful memories we carry. The sun was fully out now, and it warmed my skin. I closed my eyes for a moment, just standing there in the light. I thought about everything that had happened. I thought about how Maximus had come into my life, how I had helped him find his way home, and how, in doing so, I had found a little piece of myself again. The healing wasn't instant, and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. I opened my eyes and smiled, knowing that whatever came next, whatever chapter lay ahead, I would be ready. Not because I was healed, but because I had learned how to live with the wounds, how to live with the past, and how to walk forward with hope. It's funny how life works sometimes. You think you're just helping someone, or something, and you end up saving yourself in the process. I never expected, when I took that first step to help Maximus, I was also taking the first step on a journey that would lead me back to myself. But that's the way it happens, isn't it? If there's one thing I've learned, it's that healing isn't a destination. It's a journey that requires patience, compassion, and, most importantly, the willingness to let go of what you can't change. It's about finding new ways to live, to love, and to embrace the messiness of life. So if you're reading this, wherever you are, and you've felt lost or broken or like there's no way out, I want you to know something: you're not alone. You don't have to do this alone. There are people and animals who can help you find your way. You just have to be willing to trust, to listen, and to heal. If this story touched you, if it resonated in some way, maybe it's time to take that first step. Maybe it's time to open your heart to someone who needs you, or to something that needs saving. Maybe it's time to believe again in second chances, because in the end, we all deserve a second chance,